Hello there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Matthew Turner, and I am joined today by a fellow writer and author, Robert Peterson, who has written a book called The Entrepreneur Mindset Shift: Growth Characteristics of Success. Now, this isn't your usual conversation like you'll hear on the majority of podcasts where a writer comes on and talks about their book in a promotional way. This is two writers who are just going to dive into a conversation as if we're sat across a table sharing a few drinks. And I am exceptionally interested in how Robert has approached his book and how he's taken such a massive subject about his mindset and condensed it and organized it and made it somewhat cohesive. So I'm excited to dive into that. But before we do, Robert, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Well, Matthew, it's a pleasure. Your accent makes you sound so much smarter than me, so I feel like I have to step up my game.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, it's funny you say that because if we compare English dialects, the Yorkshire one is probably one of the ones considered to be, the working class. So yeah, I like to hear that because I don't hear it often. So there we go.
There you go.
I'm excited to kind of dive in, and the whole sort of topic that we're going to touch upon here is taking big topics and trying to fit them into something that works as a book. I've done it before. Some of my books have kind of taken very vast concepts, which could in their own right be like 7 or 8 mini books, and it becomes daunting pretty quick, at least in my experience, because you've got this massive thing and you're trying to share everything, but you can, and that that's not what the reader wants. So I'm just going to dive in right now and ask you, mindset as a subject, it is vast. So what was it like when you started to segment it all and try to make it more digestible? What was it like in terms of your plan and your vision, or did you just kind of start and hope that it would come together?
No, actually, so the process was probably a little crazy. Most people think I've lost my mind. So I looked at my calendar, and between Christmas and New Year's, I had one appointment. And so this last year, Christmas and New Year's were both on the weekend. And so the 5 days in between Christmas and New Year's, I had one appointment on my book. And I said, well, maybe this is the time I'm supposed to write my book. And so I made the commitment basically over the Christmas weekend. And on Monday, spent the day brainstorming and outlining. And the process that I really started with was this idea that I've had it, having coached entrepreneurs and worked with entrepreneurs, was these are some of the entrepreneurial things that they don't teach in school that I wish I'd taught my kids. And so that's where I was kind of starting and outlining. And then, of course, thinking about Google keywords and some of those things. And it really ended up being more focused on some of the mindset things, the specific areas that entrepreneurs, and I think anybody, but really entrepreneurship is kind of a crucible of personal growth. And so I think I narrowed it down to like 7 and decided those would be the chapters that I would start with. And so that's why it kind of shifted from the book I wanted to teach my kids the things they never learned in school to, focusing on these entrepreneurial things in a specific entrepreneurial way. And so outlined the book on Monday, and I committed to writing 6,000 words a day for those 6 days between Christmas and New Year's. And so by the end of it, I'd have 36,000 words. Right after the new year, my wife immediately cut 3,000 words in her first path through, which was like wounding. The most damaging thing you can do to a writer is start redlining through all of his words. And turns out when you try to write 6,000 words a day, you repeat yourself a lot. So my wife was actually making the book much better, but it didn't feel that way at the time when my brain was stuck on this word count that I was working so hard to get to. So my biggest struggle at the time had been really just recognizing that my wife, who did the first walkthrough, and the editor that I paid to edit the book were on my side. Like Like I had to, I
Yeah.
had to work through quite a bit to recognize that they were trying to help me, not hurt me.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's so insane to think that you wrote the entire like first draft in such a short space of time, and to move from the outline to the first draft in such an immediate fashion as well. Because when I come up with my outlines for books, I like to sit back and allow the idea to marinate for some time, and work on the outline over a prolonged period. Let ideas marinate. I quite often will then turn them into post-it notes and put them on
Oh,
the wall
nice.
behind me now and rearrange it. And it's a process that can take weeks, months.
Well,
And you've just all
I
done
did,
it in a day. It's incredible.
yeah. Well, I did whiteboard it twice, three different times. And each time I whiteboarded it, it started to start taking some different shape.
Mm.
Um, but because I had that week with literally no other obligations. My kids no longer live at home. The business is my wife and I's primary thing. And obviously during the holidays, there's just not a lot of other activities going on. Most people like here, they try to get their holiday parties in before Christmas or after New Year's. That space between Christmas and New Year's just happened to be just so wide open. And what really started to happen was because of that brainstorming session with the whiteboard and the ideas just started, it really just boiling. Like my focus for that entire week for all like from the time I woke up, even through my sleep, was what does the book need? Right. And I finished that draft. And even after I did add another chapter and I did add some things, but the intriguing part was the ideas in the middle of the night, right? That you'd wake up and be like, oh, I need to add this and write a little note. And because my focus was so centered on that idea, right? What you focus, where your focus goes, your energy flows. It really did. And there was just no distractions. And I found that to be really powerful. And I think if I ever wrote another book, I would take a retreat and do something similar.
Interesting. So did it surprise you just how easy it all kind of came out?
Um, I mean, a little. I've obviously been working in the space now for 4 years, plus I spent 20 years in ministry. It's a similar space as far as personal growth and development. And so I think I had the ideas, um, getting them to kind of feel like they belong together. And so we changed the order of a few things. And my book doesn't have a lot of story. It's kind of informational, but it's pretty simple. And so I tried to keep it. I call it an airplane read. And so, that
Okay. Yeah.
36,000 words, 100 pages is really what I was targeting. And at the time, I was only planning to PDF it and put it on my website and give it away or whatever. I had no intention of publishing it. And I happened to post on Facebook, hey, I wrote a book between Christmas and New Year's. And one of my podcast guests had um, commented and says, well, I know a publisher. And so I had a meeting with that publisher on January 5th. I had a meeting with an editor on January 6th and found an editor that could do it. And then actually had a forward written, and because of the podcast had connections to get endorsements, people to actually read it and do endorsements. And by February 12th, we had the first 200 print copies. And so not only was I able to write it quickly, I was able to have it put into print pretty quickly in comparison to. So it went from like, if you'd asked me on Christmas morning, I wouldn't have known that I was writing a book. And so we went from Christmas morning to February 12th, and created a book and and put it out there.
Wow.
And it's been very well received. Like I've had very few people say yuck, right? Most people have read it and said, wow, I really enjoy your writing. I really enjoy the information. It's not very deep. And so the next step is to take it a little deeper, but it's enough information that it's not overwhelming either. So
That's fascinating how it just came together so quickly. Puts me to shame as well because my last book was like a 3 year journey, partly because of the pandemic and how certain things came to a standstill. But yeah, between, I suppose, me penning the original ideas and getting like the initial outline to then it landing on my desk, it was about 3.5, pushing on 4 years. But I also love that how a book can just take on so many different journeys. Like one book can come about so quickly, one might take longer. but in the end of the day, they're still two books side by side, and they can offer the same amount of value. They can provide the same kind of epiphanies to the right person. So it's one of the things that fascinates me about books, because every writer's journey is so different. And it sounds like yours has just been sped up and condensed into a couple of months. I imagine it was overwhelming, but also probably fantastically freeing.
Yeah, there were some elements of that. I think the biggest advantage that I had is because there's no character, and so there's the character arc is actually the person reading the book and their personal journey, rather than me having to figure out, the hero's journey or the character journey that I want my characters to take. And so for me, it's fascinating to listen and learn, how did you decide which character arc to follow, and how do you telling the story. Obviously, I think one of my challenges has always been, from what perspective to tell the story, right? Does it need to be the little birdie on my main character's shoulder, and so you can't see the things that other characters are doing, or some of those things in the character journey that are a little more challenging in a fiction, in a storybook, right? That's telling this story.
It is. I've done a couple of different approaches with my books over times. I like to write first person. That's my favorite. I find first person interesting, and I'll explain why in a second. But I've done omnipresence as well. I always find omni a little bit cheating, because you can just skip into any person's mind. For me, that always feels a bit of a fraud. Like, it kind of breaks certain rules, and you can just hop from Joe's mind to Sally's, and you can be just everything. And for me, that I would find that quite overwhelming if I was to do that all the time. But I've done it, but I did it in a very structured way, where I was only able to go into certain heads, because I don't like the idea of just being able to like jump from one person to another. But I've always swayed towards first person, because when I'm inspired to write a book, it's usually because there's some kind of curiosity inside me. It's some kind of blocker. I have a question or a fear, or it's where my anxiety lives, and I feel like I need to get it out. And for me to get it out, I need to write. So I tell a story, it just naturally happens. For me to learn, like truly learn, I need to sit on those thoughts and those questions and go exploring them and research them and interview other people, and then bring it back to that character. So for my most recent, as an example, is Ferdinand. And I was able to kind of disconnect my own personal growth, my own personal journey, by stepping into the shoes of Ferdinand, who's got many of the same questions as me and has many of the same kind of issues and whatnot, but he's not me. So I'm able to figure out what I need to figure out in someone else's shoes. So that's why I've always sort of swayed towards first person. One, because I feel like it allows me to write a more personable book for the person reader, just preference. But secondly, it feels more realistic for me, because although I'm not Ferdinand, a part of me is. And although Ferdinand's not me, a part of him is. And I'm able to learn and discover what I need to by walking in his shoes. So it's funny when it comes to like the character development. It's daunting and wonderful, and I don't go too deep into the process. Like some people really create a very deep avatar and go deep into the backstory. I've done that in the past, not so much with Ferdinand. I didn't feel like I had to. I just trusted the process, but I had a very specific idea of where his personal journey would go. And then I just thought, if you live this, Matthew, and if you live side by side with Ferdinand, like that will happen. Like you will personally grow, he will personally grow. The questions you have along the way will align with Ferdinand and vice versa. So yeah, hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of an insight into like how I personally approach the journeys. It's a bit of a mess from a organizational perspective, but it always is comforting for me.
Well, I like that idea of essentially stepping into your character's shoes and really just trying to think of, well, how would he make these choices, and how would he do this? And I agree with you about the omnipresence, that it's kind of cheating and feels like if you can be in everybody's head, then there's no, you lose perspective. I think it's
I think so.
yeah.
I like the challenge as well from a writer's perspective, because there's sometimes when I like the lead character who I am will be having a conversation with someone, and you want to step into their head and give a good perspective of like what they're thinking, what they're feeling. But by not being able to step into them, you've got to literally show that through words. You've got to try and paint the picture. And I think that one pushes you as a writer, but two, it pushes you to really figure out the words that need to be said to kind of help the reader. Whereas if you can just skip from Ferdinand's head to Will's head, for instance, I don't know, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to really think about this situation. And by really thinking about the situation, you're bringing out the words that need to come out. And by bringing out the words that need to come out, you're giving the reader the perspective they need to learn, to expand, to grow, to kind of take what they need to from that chapter or that scene. So yeah, I've never really loved the whole. I never love books when I'm constantly skipping from one head to another, unless it's done in a very tactful way, where one chapter is one person, another chapter is another. I think that can work as long as there's rules. But if you don't set rules as a writer and you just allow it to become an omnipresence free for all, yeah, I'm not a fan.
Well, I think the other, I love storytelling, and just the, for, in my world, it's the stories we tell ourselves, and the stories we believe about ourselves, and those stories are just as powerful as stories that we watch, right? We're all, the reason that story is so powerful is because we're all living a story. And
Yeah.
and I think, one of the challenges for authors is the educational piece that has to take place through a story. Like, I just watching a detective show, and the detectives tell each other something that's so obvious to a detective, right? That, well, the reason we have to arrest him this way is because of this rule or that rule, right? And they, of course, know those things. But what they're doing through the dialogue is educating the audience of why this is necessary. And I think that that can be really fascinating in storytelling, is how you educate the audience through the characters' dialogue, through the characters' action, especially in areas, technical areas and things that the audience may not be familiar with, in their world. And so that's a whole nother level of the character arc, that sometimes, technical aspects that have to be taught through the characters and their actions. And that's just a whole nother layer, right, in the storytelling complexity.
Yeah, it pushes you. It pushes you because you have to think like, I know what I want to say right now, and I know the meaning behind this, but I need to communicate in a way where it will be obvious to the reader, knowing that the reader might not know what I know. In fact, the reader probably won't know what I know. So it forces you to try and come up with certain dialogue and certain feelings and thoughts and in monologues and the like, but in a way where it doesn't feel like it's just dumping a bunch of information on them for the sake of it. I've read books like that where they spend pages giving backstory because the writer is so scared of the reader not knowing that they just blurt a bunch out. And then you step back and go, well, but this isn't realistic. Like, this isn't the kind of conversation a friend would have with another friend. And if that is or doesn't feel realistic, from the get-go, the book just doesn't feel immersive. Whereas so long as the dialogues and the monologues and the things that are happening feel natural and they feel like they would happen in the real world, you get drawn in. So it's a tough balance, but it's the great part of storytelling because it isn't easy. The story's inside you, but you've got to really peel away the onion and keep going back and back and trying again and again and rewriting until you figure out the way to communicate what you need to say.
Well, and I think for me in my book, and the ideas or the concepts that I try to pass on to clients, to other people, to add value, my idea of transferring this information to my kids The challenge has been, all of my wisdom is based on a ton of experience in different countries, in different places, in all of these different things that have brought me to where I am, right? My education and post education and of course work experiences. And when you meet somebody, your first assumption is that they understand the things that you're talking about because you believe they've had similar experiences. But of course, each one of us is unique, and each one of our journeys is so unique that, like, even my wife and I have been together for 30 years tomorrow, and and even our perspective side by side has completely different stories that we tell, or memories that we have, and and she sees events in one way that I see events in another. And if you asked us each about those events separately, you wouldn't think we were at the same place. And so it's always fascinating to me, the power of being able to, intentionally share information and know what part of this information, right? That background information you were talking about, what piece of that do I have to share? And what piece of, like, when you and I first got on before we hit record, you were talking about living in Northern England and all of the, and just your short description was like, oh, okay, that's kind of what I expected you to say.
Yeah.
And so it fit the stereotype. But when it doesn't fit the stereotype, you've got to go beyond and explain,
Yeah.
through the story in a way that, like you said, doesn't feel like a dump of information, to
Yeah.
help people picture the scene and feel like they're in a different place, right? You're asking people to set their reality aside and to embrace this new reality, but the new reality has to fit their expectations, or they'll cut it off, right? They
Yeah.
won't believe it, and then it's ruined, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people assume that that is only valid and relevant for fiction.
Mm,
But I think it's totally valid and relevant for nonfiction too, because you need to teach in a way that doesn't feel like it's teaching.
mm,
You need to paint a picture at all times. It doesn't matter whether it's first person, third person, omni, fiction, nonfiction. It doesn't matter. You need to
mm,
try and bring the words to life. You need to paint that picture because to some extent, we all kind of visually learn, whether it's visually seeing something or visually rearranging the words and the sounds so we can better appreciate something. And the books that learn to kind of tell that story and to kind of paint those pictures are the books that get remembered. So unless you're writing a book that is purely textual and it's very much dry for a business course or something, but even then there needs to be an element of bringing it to life. But yeah, books need life, they need feeling, they need depth. And that isn't easy. And whenever you read a book and it feels like you can picture it and you feel like you are there and you feel like you can understand and you have the perspective of the character or the author, it's taken a lot to get there. Like the writer has gone through a lot to figure out the way to say that the right way. So I find that fascinating as a reader as well as a writer. And it's one of the things which I've probably personally taken a lot of inspiration as a reader, because when I find books which make me lean in, when I find a book that I remember and by like they stick in my mind, that's a sign for me to get more about an author so I can learn as a writer because they've got some skills. They've got
mm.
some knowledge to pass on, whether they know it or not. Um, I'm intrigued because you mentioned earlier for your book it wasn't filled with story. It's very much in the sort of hand of the reader and their journey. I mean, I don't know if you've got plans for more books, but if you were to write a book again, do you feel like now you have greater experience or confidence or context around storytelling, like to approach it in a different way?
Absolutely. I think if I do another book, it'll be a parable, and so
Really?
it'll still have um, some guidelines and some similar ideas of these are some things to learn, but I'll do it in the context of a mentor, or a mentor relationship, or two business people growing through their business relationship together, and sharing, one person potentially coaching another person, right, through these concepts and ideas, with a set of rules or guidelines that they've used in their own business. And 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 I think the parable has real power in obviously communicating story and conversation. And so it'll take it. So it's a combination of fiction, because the rules will be very non-fictionally, but yet a fictional characters living those out and growing their
Yeah.
business.
I love parables and fables. I mean, Beyond the Pale is a fable, a parable, and yeah, it's something I always wanted to do. Combining, you said it yourself, combining fiction and non-fiction, because it allows you to teach something that feels very important to you in a way that doesn't feel like it's being taught. It's just literally sharing stories and connecting dots and hoping the reader kind of gets the revelations they need. I think it's a fascinating way to tell stories. And I think we're going to see more and more of it moving forward, because I don't know, we're so immersed these days with
Oh,
reality TV and social media and little mini videos and everything. Like, storytelling is more rich and vibrant than probably at any other point, at least we're constantly surrounded by it. Like, we can't escape it. I, so we're just, it's expected. Like, if you can't teach through story, you're just going to be left behind. So I think we'll see more and more parables and fables, because yeah, if you want your book to actually hit home into a generation that's so used to just small and mighty little pieces of content, then you're going to struggle to build any kind of momentum. And yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of it. Do you think you've got plans then for another book? Have you
oh yeah,
caught the bug?
yeah. No, I'm. In fact, I I printed my. I have a set of 11, and I'm going to narrow them down to probably 7 rules that are already. Yeah, it's already happening. We're putting a little more legwork into this one.
Yeah. So what's the approach like this time then? That's interesting. I'd love to learn more about that, because the first one, it felt like, from what you've said, it just kind of happened very naturally. It was something that you were like, here's an opportunity to do it. I've wanted to do it. Now is the time to do it. And the outline, and then you just wrote, and then within a couple of months it was published. I imagine you learned an absolute ton, not just about writing, but publishing and beyond. So what are you doing different for this next book, or what do you think you're going to do different for this next book compared to the first?
Yeah, I mean, so right now I'm just churning on the rules. So that's kind of like the outline, right? So
Yeah,
so let maybe similar to what your process was, is I'm carrying that outline around in my notebook, and every now and again, pop it out and read through, and just, I don't know, just planting some seeds, I guess. And so
yeah,
so we're letting it percolate a little bit more. Um, and I think, character development will be the next piece. What kind of characters do I want to live this out, and what would that look like? And so yeah, we're just, part of it's because we're busy, right? I just there's a lot going on, and so I haven't made the commitment to say, all right, I'm going to sit down and do a half hour a day or an hour a day, or. So right now it's I'm allowing it to percolate, and that's not to say that my other books, some of those ideas hadn't been percolating for me, because I use them every day, and so it's not to say that I wrote something completely from scratch over a 1 week period. This is material that I use constantly with clients and in my work. And so it wasn't necessarily new things, right? And so the idea for a fable, is kind of a new way to tell the story. And so that, I think it'll take a little bit more energy and effort. And so letting it sit,
yeah.
letting it grow, so, as it were.
Yeah, I've come across this a few times with especially people who like coaches or teachers or consultants, and their first book is very much focused on what they do and what they have done for a long time. So it's like been, even though they might not have like had the outline or the idea for the book for long, it's kind of been in the back of their mind for years, and in some cases decades. So it feels quite natural and easy because it's been taught, rinse and repeat over and over and over. Like, you've gone through the process, you've got the experience, you've got the stories, and it's just like ready to come out. And then if you catch the bug and you want to turn one book into two, that's when it gets difficult, because like you feel like you're starting from a start line. You've already shared all those past experiences, so now you're having to be more intentional about just choosing certain areas. You might have to do a bit more research. So I've come across that a few times where people find the first book not necessarily easy. I don't think any book's easy, but they find the process quite therapeutic because it's been screaming to escape them for a long time. But the second book feels a little bit more forced. It feels a little bit more real because they're having to very, very intentionally think, right, what is this book going to be about? Like, what needs to go into this book? What's its purpose? How's it going to help?
Well, then taking those lessons from the previous book's experience and saying, all right, obviously my first book's not my magnus opus, but maybe, how do I make this better? How do I have a bigger impact? If I'm going to spend the energy to write a book, how do I help it have a bigger reach and a bigger influence? And I think that's the piece for me that I really want to make sure that, if I do put this energy into a book, that I'm gonna 10x or 100x what I did with my first book.
Yeah, it's interesting to say about lessons there. Like, does one spring to mind? Like, but on the back of the book,
I think the biggest is the amount of promotion or energy I could have been driving ahead of time, right? Getting people excited about the idea, getting people, creating a team or a community of people that said, I want to read it, I want to share it, I want to love it. I think the biggest piece would be having the build up to be able to get more people excited about it and actually create a community of 500 people that say, yeah, we're going to read it and we're going to share it. Right. And I think that could have, a huge impact. And I've had lots of people, say, wow, you wrote a book in a week and you bought it. And there's a lot to do with speed and combined with the podcast, it just adds some authority, right? Makes me look good on my website that I have a podcast and I have a book and I'm a coach. And so check, right?
Yeah.
But if I have a book that people really enjoy, then that's even better, right? So the idea isn't just to write a book for the sake of writing the book's sake anymore, right? Because now I've done that. I've written a book, check that off.
Check.
Now I can write a book. Let's write a book that can make a difference and make an impact. And I know it's easy. It's actually not. We can sit here and say writing a book is really hard and it takes energy, it takes work, but the truth is it takes doing. It just takes the commitment to do it. And once you make the commitment to do it, it's not that hard. I mean, there's work, right? But you and I know it's not that hard of work. We have people in this country that are still digging in under the ground every day for coal, and we have people that are picking up trash and swinging hammers and building houses. And so for me, writing a book, if that's what I get to do is use my mind to write a book and get paid for that, like, no, I'm not going to say that that's really, really hard work. It takes some energy and it takes a commitment, but just like I think anything, we can do anything we want to if we set our minds to it. And so that's the really cool thing, that having done it once, okay, writing a book isn't that bad. I can do another one. And for me, it was never a bucket list thing. It was, wow, let's see if we can do this. And now that we've done it, it's like, oh, how can we do this bigger and better now?
I like that. Yeah. I like how it's kind of sparked something and given you the drive to want to do another one, but do it a bit differently. And like you say, not just have a book for the sake of it, because I certainly have come across that many times over where people have a very specific reason for having a book. They're a speaker maybe, or whatever it might be, and it's like a glorified business card, and that is absolutely fine. But then to keep on writing books, I think there needs to be purpose behind it. Like if you want to write a second book and a third book, it's got to feel like it needs to escape you. And once you have that feel like you've got a story to tell, you've got something to teach, and you're wanting to do it in a way that is going to simultaneously educate and entertain, that is when the magic happens to me. Because regardless of where you sell 100 copies, 1,000 copies, 1,000,000 copies, like, you're going to have an impact on some readers. We would all like to have a bigger impact. It just goes without saying. But I think if you can walk away with a book where you know you've had an impact, you know that it's had an impact on some people, that's what makes it all worth it. Nice. And yeah, it's certainly not the hardest job. It's certainly not the easiest of processes. But yeah, it's certainly what kind of fuels me, knowing that what I've written has helped and what I've written has like value in the world. And as long as it has that, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think, I mean, obviously there's a lot of people, and right now it's as easy as it's ever been to write a book and get it published. Like,
definitely,
like you could write a book and you could literally put it on Amazon. You know, it's harder to get your cover approved and have your cover match the standards than it is for your writing to matter.
Isn't it?
Just to clarify the challenges, right? Like, so if you pay somebody on Fiverr that creates book covers, that knows what they're doing, your book will be approved and it'll be on Amazon, no matter what the words inside it say. I'm just gonna be honest, right? Right? Because the Amazon doesn't care what the words say. They just want to make sure the cover looks good and matches their standard and looks good on their website. But if that's what you want to have, is a book that you say, I'm a published author, my book's on Amazon, that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
And if you want a book that you can sell 100 copies, that's pretty easy to do. You get your family and friends and you could sell 100 copies. But if you want a book that you really do want to sell, now I'm not going to tell you can make a living from it, because very few people do. It takes a lot of energy to make a living from writing books and books alone, right? But you can certainly create something that is good and get it published and sell 1,000 copies, sell more than that, but it will take work and it will take energy, and it needs to be good. And so but the cool thing is, this is the best time in history to do those things. That there's so many helps and tools and things available to, and you can put it out there to your friends. And I did this. I took my book. I said, I've written a book, and I asked the first 10 people, would you please read this to make sure I don't look stupid? That's literally what I asked. If I'm going to put this out in the world, I just don't want to look like a total idiot. And that was literally the level. That was the standard at the time. And then when I started talking to a publisher, I said, okay, now we need an editor. Oh, okay. Well, I paid somebody for that because it was a little more important than my 10 friends. Right. And so there's ways to get good at writing. There's ways to get better at writing. And today, that this is, if you're listening and you want to write a book, just do it. Just start. Like, just pull out a piece of paper every single day and write something, and you'll become a writer, and you'll be able to write a book, and it won't be as hard as you ever thought it was. Too many people overthink stuff and overcomplicate stuff, and the truth is, now's the best time in the world to do it. And so if you're considering writing a book, just do it. Just get started. Because I think getting started is 90% of the 90% done.
Yeah, it's always the hardest step, the first one. I imagine a lot of what you just said there, Murray, is what's in your book as well, because that is such a huge piece around, building a robust, growth-oriented mindset, is just having this ability to step beyond, take that step, trust that you'll learn and that you might not have all the answers now, but if you kind of lean into it and embrace it, that you'll figure it out as you go along. And yeah, it just takes action. I mean, that's what so much of what mindset comes down to, just having the, belief and faith and brevity to just take some action, to just do what needs to be done.
Well, and so many people won't do it because they're afraid it'll make them look bad, or they won't do it right. And you won't. You're not going to do it right the first time. So just do it. Get it done. right? Send it to an editor, let them redline the daylights out of it, and then do it again. And then redline the daylights out of it and do it again. But guess what happens is you're learning and you're becoming a better writer, and you're becoming better at what storytelling. And if you want a really good book, do it 10 times before you do the really good book, but just do it. And the truth is, until you do it, you don't know how to do it. You think you know how to do it, but until you do it, you don't know. And I think the challenge, so many people are trying to figure it all out, have all the steps figured out before they just do it. And you just got to do it. You just got to start writing. There's so many writing tools, and gosh, if you install a corrector on with, the combination of Google Docs and Grammarly, like, yeah, I mean, come on.
Saves my life a lot.
Oh, heck, hello. Like Grammarly, at least the words will all be spelled right. Like at least have that. They might not be the right words in the right places, but they'll all be spelled right.
They'll be spelled right. Yeah.
Grammarly, I mean, there's so many tools available to help, and there's so many groups. Like when I first started writing, I wrote in a compilation book years ago, and I got involved in a Facebook group that had writers, and you send them your chapter and they read it and they send back. And you can get 3 or 4 people to do that are writers. And my name's in the front of somebody else's book because I did that for her. I read every chapter of her book and I sent suggestions, and whether they use them or not, but you're learning and reading. And so the 2 things you can do if you want to be a writer are read books and write.
Yeah, it's one of the big steps I took when I first started to take it seriously, was submit my writing to certain writers' forums and communities to get critiques. And you mentioned it earlier, it hurts when you get those critiques. It hurts when you see those red lines. But it's so essential, because I knew I wasn't a writer at that point. I knew I had a lot to learn, but it still hurts. But you've just got to step beyond that, because you know that if you do, and then you take that advice on board and you get a little bit better and you rinse and repeat enough times, you'll get to a point where you're pretty good. You're ready to.
And they're still going to redline it.
Oh, they'll still redline it.
They'll still redline it. So recognize that that's not personal. Right?
No,
it's not personal. And that's the challenge, I think, especially if you let a loved one read it, and if you can't take criticism from a loved one, so for me, it's I had to recognize my wife wants my book to be good.
Yeah.
She wants my book to be better. And so I had to step back and say, okay, she's making my book better, even though she just cut a third of it off. Now I got to write another 4,000 words just to get back up to my word count. And so it's not personal. And start to see the book is not personal, which is hard for a lot of people, right? You got to let go of it and recognize, hey, this is just a project, and I want this project to be better. And so to be better, I got to listen to other people say, well, this doesn't say what you think it says, or this doesn't sound like you want it to sound, or, and just allow that space to happen. And of course, yeah, it hurts, but you get over it. Like, you've been hurt before. And the truth is, you become better if you listen and you pay attention to what they're fixing, because then you don't make those same mistakes the next time. And that's why
absolutely
the only way to get better as a writer is to write.
One of the best steps I ever took was hiring my first editor. I learned so much from just taking on board what they edited, and you learn through that. This has been fascinating, Robert, and I've really appreciated kind of diving into this. It's been fascinating to hear your experience and how it just all happened so quickly, but also on the back of it, the lessons learned and how it's already feeding, a new desire and a new way to go about the next one. I think that's fantastic, and I think it kind of sets you up fantastically. But I also think it's a great lesson to show about just through action, you will get further down the line. And so many people, and this isn't to do with writing, this is many walks of life, they struggle to take action because they're worried their first version isn't going to be perfect.
And of course,
Exactly. Like we know it intellectually, but we're emotionally scared to have like an imperfect next step. So whether it's to do with your weight, or whether it's to do with business or writing or a podcast or personal growth, whatever it is, we're so worried about by taking the steps we need to take that we won't have it figured out after 30 days or after the first thing. Then we'll just be like, it'll mean we're a failure. But all it means is that you've just taken your first journey, the first of many.
The true failure is the person that doesn't take the step.
Yeah, exactly.
Because even wrong steps lead to the lessons that you need to learn to get to the right steps. But if you don't take any steps, you don't get any lessons, and then you don't get any result. And so wrong action is better than no action. I'm firmly convinced that wrong action will still lead to what you want because of what you want and your willingness to go for it. And so few people recognize that. Like, you don't learn to write until you start writing.
Yeah.
Until you're putting it on paper and start correcting it and fixing it. And I think it's analogous. For me, it was language learning was the first place that really had to happen when I learned a second language. And if you're not willing to try it, you're not willing to use it, you're not willing to put it out there and make mistakes, you're not going to learn a second language. It just doesn't happen. It's kind of like learning a sport. Nobody can learn a sport without making mistakes. You don't learn baseball without striking out. You don't learn tennis without missing or you're going long, or you don't learn golf without slicing or, putting a few balls in the wrong places. But you got to be willing to look silly in front of your friends in order to grow. But then guess what? You're going to pass your friends up because they're all left behind not learning, and you're getting to the next level and the next level and the next level because you just keep trying and you keep trying and you keep trying. It makes a huge difference, especially with writing. I think writing is just one of those things that every one of us can just start with a little journal and tell ourselves a little story every single day.
Yeah.
And you're going to make huge progress. You make huge progress. Exactly. If you wrote 10, 20 minutes a day, even just to yourself, it's huge progress.
It stacks up. Yeah. So this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate your story and love hearing your journey and how you've approached your characters and your storytelling. So thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for sharing, because I really appreciated learning from how you've done your process as well.
Pleasure's all mine, my man. So if anyone's been listening to this and wants to learn more about you and your book, like, where's the best place we can direct our browser to?
So add value, 2life.com is our website. And I think there's lots of ways to contact me through there. And reach out. I'm on LinkedIn, Robert C. Peterson, bald guy. So if you're listening to an audio version, I don't know. But LinkedIn's another place I spend time. So it's there's definitely opportunities to find me.
And if anyone wants to dive into my little world, just head over to beyondbook.co. That's beyondbook.co. You'll be able to get linked to my latest book as well as all my socials. So if you have any kind of questions, reach out. It'd be fantastic to chat. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching/listening. This has just been a very nice informal peek into the world of a couple of writers. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it sparked some kind of idea or venture or whatever it may be. So thanks for joining us, and Robert, thank you for joining me.